that should do it as far as the timing is concerned. Alright, hey everybody, you want to see the best book I've ever read? This is it. It's called A Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. It's so good that it had me looking sidelong at every other book I'd read up until now. Because it's obvious that this book was meant to be read by people and not bore them out of their minds. I used to call Blood Meridian the best book that I ever read because structurally it was very sound. Not that I got it at all, but the point of it, I understood, the gratuitous violence. I could tell that it was like beyond me in a way that I couldn't understand. A lot of that manifested as this gap in my knowledge, or the lack of knowledge about the Western canon, So I just kind of gave it to that book because it was like, kind of dope and stuff, yada yada. But that's not my favorite book. My favorite book up until this point had been Crash by J.G. Ballard, which is all just sex and violence in a very unique way. Just spoke to me like very, very deeply. The sense of people literally destroying themselves out of their lust, just like, that's like so far up my alley, it may as well take out the trash. But that's not a good book. Like there's things in that book that kind of like bother me, like the way that every girl who has strong hands, I'm like, oh, he's trying to fuck her. You'll just have like essentially catchphrases he repeats that just automatically you know where his mind is going, and I kind of like, I wasn't really feeling that, but still favorite book up to this point. But this book is great in every single way. Oscar Wilde was part of what was called the aestheticist movement. The primary motive was that it be like beautiful. That was like art's function, not to serve some, Rage Against the Machine type political thing, but to just be beautiful, just to be enjoyed. This book is just supposed to entertain you, and it's clear from the jump. So even though this book is about the destruction of someone's soul by wanton hedonism and a lack of moral censor, that's not the point of the book. The point of the book is to entertain you for a couple of hours. I think that's the biggest difference between this book and pretty much every other book I've ever read. That primary driver is never put on the graph. It's never even thought about. It's almost like a given, but even though it's a given, it gets lost in the sauce. And some books are just prohibitively boring. So it really just makes me question like other books in a real way. Okay, so here's kind of the long and short of the book, spoiler-free version, okay? Dorian Gray is about two guys who don't have jobs, and they go about just ruining other people's lives. Henry Wooten, he gives Dorian Gray, like, his way of seeing the world, which is at its core cynical and staunchly unserious. And it pretty much amounts to him living like a bee going from flower to flower, but every flower is just whatever he finds beautiful in the moment. And when he's kind of sucked all the beauty out of people and things in his life, he just floats off to the next. And that's like his perfect way of living in the world. And I guess it works for him because he doesn't have to do anything. So this kind of messes with Dorian, and he starts to realize that he's not going to be beautiful forever. So when his friend Basil, their mutual friend and artist, paints a picture of him, he starts to get jealous that that picture is not going to age and that he will, and he'll be unbeautiful and essentially unworthy of whatever. And he makes this kind of magical wish, or it's magical portion of the book, that he would not age and the portrait would age instead. And lo and behold, that's kind of what happens. Or it is what happens. Yeah, so then he starts living his life deeply influenced by that philosophy of hedonism, and he spends the next years of his life in that mode. And as he accrues regrets and misfortunes, the physical manifestation of his actions appear on the painting. And that starts to eat away at Dorian's soul, knowing that even though on the outside he remains beautiful for these years, his true inner hideousness is reflected in that portrait. So here's the deal. Number one, this book is unreasonably funny. When I first started reading this book, like the first 3 pages or whatever, I was like, whoa, I have never read so many incorrect statements in my life. Am I supposed to believe that this is the way to see the world? And the answer is no, you're not supposed to believe that, but it's freaking funny. the way that Henry Wooten starts talking and just saying shit like way out of his ass. Very, very funny. And in that same vein, Oscar Wilde got bars. Like, the things that he says are so freaking lyrical. Here's just a little bit between Lord Henry Wooten and his cousin, and this is just, the stuff they say here is amazing. Let's see. "You are flirting disgracefully with him," said Lord Henry to his cousin. "You had better take care. He is very fascinating. If he were not, then there would be no battle. Greek meets Greek, then? I am on the side of the Trojans. They fought for a woman. They were defeated." "There are worse things than capture," she answered. "You gallop with a loose rein. Pace gives life," was the riposte. Am I saying that right? Riposte?
Here's the definition of riposte. A quick, clever reply to an insult or criticism.
There we go. All right, I got it right. "Pace gives life," was the riposte. "I shall write it in my diary tonight." "What?" "That a burnt child loves the fire. I am not even singed. My wings are untouched. You use them for everything except flight." And really, this whole chapter, freaking chapter 17. So Oscar Wilde's got bars, has had bars. I can't wait to read everything he's ever written. Yes, maybe where it shines the most is that it's actually relatable. Unlike in Jekyll and Hyde, where there were like cardboard cutouts of characters representing different things, it feels like the people in this book, even though they're from the 1880s or whatever, 1890s, there's a sense that you could just walk down to the street at the coffee shop and run into these people living their lives. They're that vibrant, they're that like real feeling. There's a sense of an undercurrent of understanding between the characters themselves and you by proxy. So you can skip over here if you want to hear about the spoilers. It's so damn good lyrically that I could just tell you everything that happens and you won't freaking miss it because the dialogue is so good. This book is just like watching Pulp Fiction. If you watch Pulp Fiction on mute and just visually try to figure out what's happening in the story, you will miss 75% of the movie. Because the movie is just people having inane conversations. And that's what this book is. It's just inane conversations, and then there's stuff happening in the background, which is like the plot or whatever. But that's just stuff. That's just the excuse for them to have dialogue. And the dialogue is just whip sharp. I mean, do what you want to do. This is where we're skipping the plot, so that's that. Okay, so Henry Wooten doesn't have a job, and he hangs out with this artist named Basil Rathbone or whatever. He's got a man crush on Dorian Gray, and he thinks he represents some kind of platonic ideal of a soul or whatever. It's his muse. It brings something out of him. And he doesn't want Henry to meet him because he knows Henry's kind of a douche, and he can really ruin people. And he doesn't want to mar Dorian's internal beauty, but you know, Dorian's there, so introduce me to your friend Basil. So they meet, and then he starts telling Dorian about his freaking philosophy on life, and Dorian can't really deal with it. It just kind of gets under his skin, and he realizes you'll be ugly. Alright, I said this right before, okay? He makes a magical wish, yada yada, okay. So he and Wooten start hanging out more, they become boys. So Dorian has the hots for this stage actress. He like talks to her after the show. And he woos her, and he only calls himself Prince Charming when he's around. Because, yeah, they decide to get married. Dorian invites his homies, Basil and the other one, Henry, to go see her play, because he just is like, oh, she's so good, she's so divine. And they go see, I think, Romeo and Juliet, and she just eats it on stage, like just deadpan, terrible job of acting. And this boy's like, well, this was a lovely night, Dorian, she's a very bad actress, where are we gonna go eat? He goes back and says it's over. She did that because she felt that being with Dorian was going to be her real purpose, so she turned her back on acting, even though that's what he was attracted to her for. So voila. So he goes home after he cuts ties with her, and he sees the first sign of change on the portrait, which is kind of a sadistic smile in taking pleasure in causing her emotional pain. And it starts to eat away at him, and he freaking writes a love letter apology to her. But then Wooten comes over the next day, and he's like, oh, you ain't here? She died. She freaking killed herself. Wooten keeps Dorian on the highway to hell by saying that there's really no loss in the world, and he wasn't really attracted to the girl. Obviously he was attracted to the acting. It wasn't the Juliet that he lost, it was some two-bit woman who no one should care about anyway. And for some reason Dorian is like, yeah, you're right. Wooten sends Dorian this book, which is a direct parallel to the picture of Dorian Gray, which I really, really wish I had a copy of. I wish it kind of existed, because the way that they were describing that book, it's like, yo, I want to read that book, but I was already reading that book. So hey, so he reads that book and he's totally enamored with the lifestyle, and he's just all about this hedonistic life. So after, you know, many years of living the low life, Dorian's reputation is like cemented. He's still rich and beautiful, but like people know, like, oh, that guy is just, he just is a bad person. Basil comes to him and tells him like, hey, why does no one like you at this point? It's maybe been, you know, 20 years or something. Dorian doesn't really want to hear it, and at this point he's like, I'll show you. He goes up to the attic and shows Basil his portrait, which is at this point like just looking wild, like looking haggard. While bro is looking at the picture, Dorian just on a whim decides to murder him. There's a knife and he just sticks it in Basil, and pow, Basil's dead. Basil's supposed to leave to like Paris or something, so there's time to like get rid of the body. He calls a chemist friend that he has like dirt on. It makes him like disintegrate the body in an unreasonably quick fashion, because there's like nothing left but like, I guess, turns him into like air, which is so weird. Okay, so he gets away with killing his boy, and it starts to really get at him, the fact that he killed his boy. Now the painting has blood on his hands. And so to get rid of his guilt, he decides to go across town and do opiums. And he goes in there, and there's a bunch of like magical crackheads sniggering at him, calling him Prince Charming, which he really doesn't like. A, because he feels guilty, and B, because they're all ugly. And so there's like, he doesn't really want to be there with like ugly people who are making him feel bad, right? Who wouldn't want that? Kudos to Oscar Wilde for being up on the magical crackhead thing, because this is 100% real. I'm just gonna, that's where I come out. The actress's brother was there. He has it out for whoever it was that caused his sister to kill herself, and of course the only name that he knows is Prince Charming. So he heard that in the opium den or outside it or whatever. I'm not going to question the man's personal life. So he sees Dorian and he gets the drop on him, you know, puts the gun to his head, just like, you know, my name is Inigo Montoya, you killed my sister, prepare to die. Dorian, quick enough on his feet, is like, when did that happen? 20 years ago? Look at me. Do I look 40? He does not look 40. So he got away with it. He still figures out that it's Dorian anyway, so he's on the hunt for him elsewhere. And so the next day they're shooting stuff, having a shooting party, and someone gets shot in the bushes. Like they think it's a servant or something. But it turns out that's Honeydip's brother. And so he feels guilty about getting away with it again, because he just always gets away with it, and he feels bad. So I guess this is the most poignant scene in the book, when Dorian's playing piano and Henry Wooten is talking about how perfect Dorian is still, because he's beautiful. And when Henry Wooten is just going off and off, just doing his inane BS talking, it rings so hollow, because you see like the uselessness of his reasoning, his leaps in logic, compared to the crushing guilt that Dorian experiences. Like, it's really like amazing just how in the beginning of the book you could almost fall for how seductive that speech is, but in the end, after true experience, you just realize like, this guy sucks, this guy's full of BS. At the end of the book, Dorian goes up to this painting, he gets mad and he decides to stab the painting, but then he dies, and so his servants come up and they see this picture of beautiful young Dorian with a knife in it, and then some old MF on the ground just looking like a withered branch. The end. 5 stars, 10 stars, 15 stars. So good that I'm like sad. Yo, that's really it, man, because like everything in my notes here is just all about like just individual lines that were so freaking tight. I was like, yo, this is like, who writes like this? Who's ever written like this? And he only wrote one book, right? Like, Oscar Wilde wrote one book, and the rest are like plays and short stories. I've been doing this channel, you know, for 2 years, off and on, granted, but never has there been anything this good. Never. So that's it, y'all. I'll get back with you next time. I think the next review I'm doing is All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy. It wasn't as good as this, but it's fine. Okay, see ya.
You know what the most dangerous thing in America is, right?